The Midnight Caller. Extended short story. It was past midnight when the city stopped pretending it was asleep. Rain kept time against the window like a metronome with a grudge, and the neon outside bled into the office in slow, dishonest colors. The detective's lamp threw a small, stubborn circle of light across a desk cluttered with unpaid bills and older regrets. The phone rang once, twice, and then with the kind of persistence that suggested someone on the other end had nothing left to lose. He answered on the second ring. His voice was a gravel road, worn, familiar, and hard to navigate. Another call at this hour? Trouble never sleeps. The voice that came back was smooth as a polished coin and twice as cold. Detective, I have information, but it comes at a price. He listened the way a man listens to a train in the distance. Patient, measuring, waiting to see if it would stop. I don't pay for riddles. Speak straight or hang up. There was a pause long enough to let the rain fill the silence. The man you're looking for? He's closer than you think. Check the alley behind the old theater. The line went dead before the detective could ask who was calling. He sat for a moment with the receiver in his hand, the plastic warm from his grip, and thought about the theater, its marquee long since dark, its posters curled like old promises. He thought about the alley, the way shadows pooled there like spilled ink. He thought about the price the caller had mentioned, and how prices in this city were never paid in cash. From the doorway, the secretary's silhouette was a sharp punctuation against the dim hall. She had the kind of voice that cut through fog. Boss, you sure about this? That alley's a trap waiting to happen. He shrugged on a coat that had seen better winters. Every lead's a trap, but I'll take my chances. Outside, the rain made the street a mirror for the city's lies. He moved through it like a man moving through memory, careful not to step where the reflection might break. The alley behind the old theater smelled of wet cardboard and old secrets. A single street lamp hummed above, throwing a cone of yellow that did little to keep the dark honest. He heard footsteps before he saw anyone. They were deliberate, the kind that belong to someone who knows how to make a threat sound like a promise. A figure stepped from the shadow, broad-shouldered and patient. The man's voice was low and slow, the kind that made you count your teeth afterward. You should have stayed out of this, detective. The detective kept his hands where they could be seen. I don't do staying out. I do finding things. They circled each other with words like knives. The man wanted to know why the detective had been asking questions about a missing ledger, about names that didn't want to be found. The detective wanted to know who had been making the calls, who had been buying silence with threats and favors. Neither of them was interested in small talk. A witness appeared then, as if the alley itself had coughed one up. She was young, her voice a tremor that hadn't yet learned to steady itself. I saw him near the theater, she said. He was talking to someone. He looked scared. Scared was a currency in this part of town, and the detective accepted it without bargaining. He pressed the witness for details, names, times, the color of a coat, and she gave him what she could. A description, a direction, a fragment of a face. It was enough to make a map of suspicion, and maps were what he lived by. The next morning, the police station smelled of coffee and tired authority. The captain, a man whose patience had been taxed by too many cases and too few resolutions, leaned over the detective's desk. We can't afford mistakes, he said. His voice carried the weight of a badge and the exhaustion of someone who had watched the city chew up better men than either of them. The detective told him what he knew. The alley, the caller, the ledger. The captain's eyes narrowed. "You're chasing ghosts," he said. "Or you're chasing something someone once buried." "Maybe both," the detective replied. He had a stubbornness that looked a lot like loyalty to the truth. The captain warned him to be careful, to keep the department's name clean, to remember that some stones were best left unturned. The detective promised nothing. That night, the city felt smaller, as if the rain had pressed the buildings closer together to listen. He went back to the theater, to the place where the posters peeled like old skin. The alley was quieter now, the kind of quiet that waits for a scream to fill it. He moved with the patience of a man who had learned to read the city's moods. A discarded cigarette butt, a smear of mud, a footprint that didn't belong. The caller's voice returned, but this time it was closer, threaded through the static of a payphone down the block. "You were right to come," the voice said. "But you're late." "Late for what?" the detective asked. "For the truth," the voice said. "And for the reckoning." The reckoning came in the form of a ledger, found in a locker behind the theater's stage. It was a small book, its pages full of names and numbers and the kind of arithmetic that made people disappear. The detective flipped through it like a man reading a confession. Each entry was a ledger of favors, a tally of debts, a record of who had paid and who had been paid off. The names were a map of the city's soft underbelly: politicians, businessmen, men who wore suits like armor. He took the ledger to the captain. The captain's face went through a dozen shades of disbelief and calculation. "If this is real," he said, "it changes everything." "It changes who gets to sleep at night," the detective said. They planned a sting, the kind that required timing and nerves and a willingness to stand in the light when the city preferred shadows. They set a meeting at the theater, a public place with an audience of one. The man who had been buying silence, the detective watched from the wings while the captain and a handful of officers waited in the dark, their radios a soft chorus of readiness. The man arrived with the confidence of someone who believed himself untouchable. He smiled like a man who had paid for his peace. He reached for the ledger, the book that had been his ledger of sins, and in that moment the city held its breath. The arrest was quick and ugly. The man's threats turned to curses, and curses to silence. The ledger was taken, the names catalogued, the evidence stacked like a small, righteous mountain. The city's machinery began to turn. Papers were filed. Statements were taken. Men who had thought themselves above consequence found themselves under the cold light of scrutiny. But the city is a patient thing. It heals in ways that favor the powerful. Deals were made in rooms with closed doors. Names were scrubbed from lists. The ledger's pages were photocopied and then misplaced. The man who had been arrested found a way to make his problems someone else's. The detective watched as the truth he had chased was trimmed and folded to fit the city's appetite for compromise. He sat alone in his office one last night, the rain a steady hand on the window. The city outside hummed with the same tired rhythm, indifferent to the small victories and the quiet defeats. He thought about the caller, about the price that had been mentioned in a voice that sounded like a coin dropped into a well. He thought about the witness, the captain, the ledger, and the way justice in this town often arrived late and incomplete. In the end, he understood that some truths were like the rain. They fell whether anyone noticed or not, and they left the world a little cleaner in places the light could reach. He also understood that the price people paid for truth was rarely measured in money. It was measured in sleepless nights, in the slow erosion of certainty, in the small, stubborn acts of refusing to look away. He picked up the phone and dialed a number he had been avoiding. The line clicked, and a voice answered, familiar, human, and a little softer than before. "You did what you could," it said. He let the silence between them do the work of a confession. "But that's all any of us can do," he said. Outside, the rain kept time. Inside, the lamp burned low. The city would keep its secrets and its bargains. But for a moment, the detective allowed himself the small comfort of knowing he had followed a thread to its end. It wasn't everything. It was enough.